Town. I'm Steve Noxon, your host, and joining me now on the phone is my next guest. This is State Senator Rob Sampson. Senator Sampson, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fabulous, Steve. Great to join you as always.
Always enjoy our conversation, sir. You were on hold during the end of the previous conversation that I just had with Mr. Chris DiPentima from CBIA, and we were talking about some of the regulation issues we have here in the state of Connecticut. First of all, some of the licensing requirements that we have are just, I think, beyond ridiculous. If you want to do nails, you have to be licensed by the state. If you want to do eyebrow work, you have to be licensed by the state. And it's things like that that just create barriers to entry for many people that we want to get into the workforce. Why do we do this here to ourselves in the state? Why do we create these roadblocks?
Well, I wouldn't say that we are doing anything, Steve. I always like to correct my colleagues when they say, we raise taxes. I'm like, hold on a minute. We didn't do anything. They raised taxes. I tried to stop them. And, so I feel the same way about that, too. These new business regulations come down every year. Sometimes they're good intentioned. You mentioned the eyebrows situation. I mean, that came from the people in that industry. They come and they say, we need to have this regulation because, this is an important thing, and there are people doing this, and they don't know how to do it, and they're risking people's health and stuff like that. And maybe they have a point, but I don't know that creating a government watchdog or a licensing scheme or structure actually solves that problem. And ultimately what it does is it creates a false sense of security for consumers because, people say, oh, that person has a home improvement contractor license. They must be a good and skilled contractor. And, of course, you and I both know that doesn't mean anything. It just means they paid a fee to the state of Connecticut
right.
For the purpose of saying they have a license. I've always been, pretty down on occupational licensing. I think it is just a burden that is unnecessary. In a truly free society where we're dealing with free adult citizens who are smart enough to make their own decisions, which is the vision for America, people do their homework. They don't just automatically choose to have their car repaired at X car repair shop or choose a doctor or someone to do their eyebrows. Based on the fact that that person has a license with the state. They do it based on, research and determining whether or not they have happy customers. That's what makes the most sense. And we get away from that more and more as big government grows and tells the citizens, don't worry, we will handle making sure that you're safe and protected. And we gave them a license, so you can trust them.
Well, I mean, if the industry is so determined to have, skilled people representing their industry, and they want to have some sort of certification or designation that says this person has been properly trained in what they're doing, well, the industry should set it up. I don't know why they lobby for the government to do it.
Amen to that. I completely agree. I happen to be a member of the National Association of Realtors. I don't agree with everything that they do necessarily, but I much prefer that organization policing the ethics of real estate agents rather than some state bureaucracy, which is probably not going to do much other than collect fees and probably get it wrong on a regular basis. So I'm with you on that.
Oh, that's par for the course for government programs. So in the session this year, there was a story in the Rep Am this morning about the casualty list, many bills that just never make it through. And I've got to say some of the things that I've been reading here, I'm kind of glad they're not getting through. I always hate this concept that, we had a successful legislative session because look at all the laws we passed. I think, especially with some of the gun proposals that were out there, I'm glad to see some of these things die. And I'm going to guess that some of that is partially due to your efforts.
That would be correct, and I agree with you completely. A successful session would be the one where government shrank and restored individual liberty and protected the rights of constituents. And sadly, that is the opposite of the trend in Connecticut. It's funny that you mentioned that article. I was looking at it this morning, too. Pretty much the things that died on the calendar in the Judiciary Committee, which is what the article was about, were intended to die by the majority. That's how they end up on the last day of the the committee's business. The Democrats, as much as Republicans, including myself, want to kill bad bills, and we will do a lot of damage. In fact, Just as a side note, we'll say that Senate Bill 16, which was the governor's giant gun control, huge, panacea kind of bill, which had everything, expansion of the assault weapons ban and, increasing bans on firearms that were created without serial numbers, which there were many of them that were lawfully produced, in the 50s and 60s like that. A lot of 22 rifles sold at the neighborhood Kmart came that way. And you would be creating, criminals out of people that possess those to this day. Lots and lots of bad gun control. We ended up actually killing the majority of that language in the bill. And that was a big victory for us just last week. And that happened because, that we had some pretty strong pro-Second Amendment folks on the Judiciary Committee. And myself, Representatives Fishbein and Dubitsky in particular, just the three of us, are a threat to talk for 10, 15, 20 hours on a bill like that. And I think the leadership of the Judiciary Committee said, we just don't want to go through that much of a headache. That's not our number one topic. But the things that died in the committee yesterday because the deadline at 5 o'clock came and went and they were not acted on, those are largely items that Democrats just didn't want anyway. They have to break it to their own members sometimes, that they really don't want to do a bill. So the best way for them to do that is to just have it not make it through on the last day. Shucks, we didn't get to it. Too many other things happened.
Yeah, no, it's always fun when you see how the games are being played. It's almost the old joke about, the two things you don't want to see made are laws and sausages. The other committee that you sit on, the Government Administration and Elections Committee, unfortunately, you were unable to stop this mail-in balloting that seems to be all the rage here in Connecticut and across the country. What was interesting is I read a story yesterday about the state treasurer changing the policy for returning unclaimed property that the state had claimed back to people and just sending checks to them in the mail. And I laughed because Senator Fonfara objected to that because he was like, I don't know if people feel comfortable with having checks being sent in the mail. And I thought, well, that's an interesting perspective. Meanwhile, balloting is perfectly okay.
Right. Well, first off, I want to take some credit for that, the issue with the unclaimed property. That was my bill that I shepherded through the Judiciary.
Congratulations.
The GAE committee this year. It wasn't just me. There were a few other people involved in it. And really, that goes back to a story that was written. And I'm doing a disservice to the reporter, but there was a reporter who actually did a tremendous story on the subject of unclaimed property and how much of it is just sitting there, which the state could legitimately return without much of a headache whatsoever. And that story is what generated so much interest, and it's what prompted me, as a matter of fact, after reading it, to put in legislation to do that. So I think that's a victory this year for Connecticut residents and taxpayers, and that's a step in the right direction.
I think that law needs to be completely gutted anyway and overturned. I think it's almost borderline criminal that the state can determine that if a deposit or a withdrawal isn't made from a bank account in 3 years, well, then that bank account has obviously been abandoned, and then they claim that money. Also as part of that article, they were talking about, easing the process to return the property that they claimed. And I thought, you really want to make that process easy, don't take it in the first place.
I agree with you completely. Yeah, that's the mentality that some of the progressives in our state and federal government have, that all money effectively belongs to them, and they're just letting us borrow it, temporarily, for our purposes. But that's where all that big government kind of stuff comes from. And I completely missed your previous question, which was about the mail-in voting. And yeah, it's such a complex issue, and it's very difficult for people to wrap their heads around. But what they have done effectively is modified our current absentee voting laws now to make everyone eligible. They've essentially just expanded the what was formerly the excuse that made you eligible for being personally ill. They now have expanded that to say any illness anywhere, including, something that hasn't happened yet, or someone got sick in another country 200 years ago.
Yeah.
It's now a reason you can vote by absentee ballot in Connecticut this year. And, the thing is, Steve, I'm not even really, adamantly against expanding absentee voting. But the problem is that the Democrats want to expand absentee voting without any checks and balances. Other states that have significant amounts of mail-in voting, they actually have a system in place. They verify people's identity. They actually verify signatures on ballots when they come. They make sure that their voter rolls are accurate so that when they send them to people, they are actually legitimate voters. The state of Connecticut is possibly the worst voter rolls in the whole country, and we had a disaster of an election in 2020 as a result of the mail-in voting. It was something like 200,000 ballot applications were returned in the mail. They've never even really done a good job of updating that list since, so that's going to happen again. What a waste of taxpayer money, for one thing. And many, many other ballots were lost in the mail that were returned by voters. There were ballots that showed up after Election Day and were uncounted because they got tied up in the mail. I could write a book, literally, about all of the problems with that system. And, the Democrats are very clever because they want to say, oh, that's Sampson and the Republicans. They're just trying to make it harder for you to vote. And then it couldn't be farther from the truth. I want people to have access to voting the same as anyone else, but I want us to have an election that people can trust. And the fact is that people don't trust the elections. In 2016, Trump won, and the Democrats said it was Russian collusion, and they didn't trust the election. And in 2020, Biden won, and the Trump supporters said, no, that was a phony election. So people are upset. They don't trust our election process, and I don't blame them. And really, it should be our focus in the state legislature to come together and do bipartisan work to make sure that the integrity of the election is restored. And that never happens. What happens is they pass more and more partisan bills that end up passing on a party line vote, because they refuse to look at election integrity and security as any part of the equation.
I get frustrated by the fact that, they talk about, well, they're trying to make it harder to vote. Well, no, not really. But you know what? What's wrong with trying to have a vote that people can trust? What's wrong with voter integrity? And if it has to be a little harder to vote to make sure it's an accurate vote, well, I think that it's worth it. I mean, you look at places, and we've had people on talking about this. The country of Mexico requires voter ID, and when they put that restriction in place, the percentage of the people voting in the country went up. Every European country requires voter ID, and they have much higher turnout than we have here in the United States. I think so many people just don't trust the system to a point where they go, why bother? It doesn't matter if I vote.
I completely agree. And I have put in bills and offered amendments for a photo identification requirement in both the House and the Senate, and I've done that maybe half a dozen times, and I will tell you, every time that I've ever offered it, it has failed on a party line vote. Every Democrat votes against it. Every Republican votes for it. People listening should understand that Democrats are absolutely opposed to photo ID. Their argument usually is that, oh, it's racist because people in the inner city, they can't afford an ID. First off, I think that's baloney. And second off, I always include in my amendment a provision that says that if you have financial difficulty and you can't afford to get one, the state will provide you with a photo ID for the purpose of voting. And even still, they vote it down. It's absurd. Their argument is absurd. And it's because they like it this way. They like the fact that there are issues with the election process because those issues tend to benefit Democrat candidates.
And it provides an open door for the kind of shenanigans we see in every single election that they deny happen. We have a caller, a regular caller here to the show that told us in South Carolina where he lives, they actually, the governor there implemented voter ID and said that if you can't afford one, we'll give it to you for free. And if you don't have the ability to get to City Hall or to motor vehicle to get this, I'll send a state limo out to pick you up and bring you to DMV to get your ID. And he said in the 10, 15 years that's been in place, 27 people have taken advantage of it. It's not hard to get an ID. In fact, you cannot go through life for the most part here in this state or in this country without having an ID. You can't buy Sudafed. You can't get on an airplane. You can't cash a check. But we can vote?
Amen to that. I've made all those same exact arguments more times than I can count. And, the sad part is that people just aren't watching. I mean, I think the news media, outside of some extraordinary radio personalities like yourself, are not reporting what is actually happening in the legislature. I don't think most people would know that we've ever voted on photo ID, which is why I brought it up. I think people need to know, yes, that this is a Republican versus Democrat issue. There's a lot of things we agree on, and there's a lot of things that we can do kumbaya. But when it comes to hard questions, sometimes we don't agree. And I like people to understand what those differences are, because that's the purpose of elections. When you go into the voting booth in November, you want to remember things like, well, it's the Democrats that want to raise your taxes, and the Republicans want to cut them. And you should also know that Republicans want to restore integrity to elections and have photo ID as a requirement, and the Democrats don't.
Yeah, it boggles my mind. I've never once voted without showing my ID. I always thought it was a requirement, and I've only learned since I've done this show that it's not. And I'm stunned by that information, because it's like, why wouldn't you want to make sure people can trust the validity of an election? When you leave it out in the open like this for questions, people are going to lose faith, and it's going to cause people to just sort of turn away. And I don't know why you would want that as part of a free and open government and governed society. The legislature is also talking about a few tax issues, and I know you don't sit on that committee, but I'm sure you've read about them. It's they want to expand the earned income tax credit. They want to, what else is it they want to do? They want to have a new child tax credit here in the state, but they don't seem to want to share that across the board. I mean, the Republicans had proposed having a reduction in the sales tax, eliminating the 1% surcharge on restaurant meals and things like that. I mean, again, this seems like to be, yet again, just legislature to appeal to a certain subset of the population. And, this is getting a little annoying.
Yeah, I completely agree, Steve. I mean, we are up against a lot. Obviously, those tax issues, I think you know where I stand on them. I'm against the earned income tax credit, have been since the very beginning, because it's effectively giving a tax refund to people who don't pay taxes. It's one of the most bizarre things on the planet. And essentially, it's just another entitlement. The thing is, we have entitlements. If people are eligible for an earned income tax credit, they're probably eligible for other entitlements. So let's just get rid of the one thing and keep the other one, and use that as the mechanism to redistribute wealth, if that's your game plan. But the fact is, the Democrats want to come up with new programs every year. Their main goals are dependency, number one. I mean, everything that we talk about in the legislature is also about creating some new element of dependency. I mean, they want to give away free diapers now. I mean, it's like, if you have a kid, you should be able to buy them diapers, I think. Maybe I'm a crazy person, but they want to give away free diapers. They want to, give away free money, and they want to do it on the backs of people that are working hard. And people were asking me all the time, how can they look at the world like this and say, people are going to get upset and they're going to leave the state? And the thing is, they know that. Even the gun control issue. Why do you think the Democrats push so hard for gun control? Partly, I think, because they know that the vast majority of law-abiding gun owners in the state are Republicans, and it's just another thing that they can do to break their back and force them to leave. The Democrats don't necessarily want to lose population in the state, but they do want to lose Republicans and gain people that are in favor of their style of government, which is a progressive style of government that is based on the government controlling all of the money and redistributing it, and keeping people dependent upon them to stay in power. And they're also, another thing we're up against is progressivism, which is the notion of kind of separating people from their elected officials. Instead of having a representative form of government that America, prides itself on, that, we of, for, and by the people, where the people elect their, representatives and senators, and then they call upon them to do their bidding. Well, the Democrats want to have a separate government that is kind of behind closed doors, unelected bureaucrats, who they would describe as experts making decisions about how we should live our lives. And we saw tons of it through this whole COVID era. It's a big creation of that. And in fact, one of the bills that I want to warn your listeners about, I think it's Senate Bill 467. Definitely got to watch out for that. This is a bill that would essentially allow local towns and cities to continue their remote meeting policy. In other words, they could do away with in-person Board of Ed and town council meetings. I can't think of a more dangerous thing.
You mean like forever?
Like forever. Yeah, it was done temporarily because of COVID, and
Right.
the argument was that we need to give people another way to access it. And I agree. I'm in big favor of having Zoom access for people to watch the legislature and participate in public hearings, but that doesn't mean you get rid of the very valuable in-person ability to meet with and actually see in person your elected officials. Anyone who's ever witnessed an angry mom at a Board of Ed meeting, wagging her finger at the, the people on the dais, the value of making sure that you have elected officials that are truly accountable to their constituents. And this will take and put a huge wall, a barrier between people and their representatives. And I'm so opposed to it, I can't even describe how angry it makes me.
Final question for you, Senator. There's been a little bit of debate back and forth about whether or not you elected officials should get a raise. What are your thoughts?
I certainly wouldn't support such a thing, but I can understand the value of that conversation. It is true that the vast majority of state legislators that are out there, come from different backgrounds, which allow them to do the job. Myself, I'm a realtor, so I have kind of a schedule that allows me to devote my energy in different ways so I can support myself. You make $28,000 a year, maybe a little bit more depending on whether you're in a leadership role or something like that as a state legislator. And the argument is that it's a part-time job. And it can be a part-time job, and quite a few of my colleagues do treat it that way. They show up, just for the important meetings, and they cast their votes and they go home. Other people invest a lot of energy and effort and work around the clock because they see this as an opportunity, and I fall into that category too. But that's my choice. The real issue is would paying a higher salary attract more people into the role and have a better cross-section of people in the state? I don't know. I'm not in favor of spending the taxpayer money ever. So that is my number one objection to it. But I do understand the argument on both sides, and I don't want to say that it is without any merit whatsoever, because effectively what you have now is super rich people who can afford to do it because they don't need the income, or people that are willing to survive on $28,000 or $30,000 a year, and then just other people that can do it because of their career. They're attorneys and real estate people and things like that. We are missing a cross section of the state workforce and taxpayers. But I don't know if that's an excuse to spend more of the taxpayers' dollars.
Well, the one thing I object to is this argument that if we pay more, we'll get better legislators, and I disagree with that entirely, because if you look at places like New York that pay their legislators $110,000 a year, I would argue that they're not getting the best and brightest in New York if you look at the state of that state as well. So I've worked in many private sector businesses where just because somebody got paid more money did not necessarily mean that they were better at their jobs or brighter. So I think that's a disingenuous argument overall. Well, Senator Sampson, it's always a pleasure to have you on here, sir. I know you're working real hard and you're keeping up the pressure to get this stuff done. We look forward to having you back again as we get closer and closer to the end of this legislative session.
I will look forward to that, Steve. Thank you very much, and thank you for all you do, making sure the truth is heard every day.
Thank you for that, Senator. Have a great day.